As a programmer, the most impactful piece of software that you use every day is your text editor. And regardless of how much experience you've got, choosing one and knowing how to use it is going to be critical to your success. I've recently been making a series of videos on my YouTube channel here where I've been talking about VS Code. VS Code is one of the most popular editors to have ever been created. While it is a Microsoft product, it's not exclusive to Windows, so whether you are on Linux, Mac, or Windows, you have access to VS Code. In fact, there are even web versions of it. There are a variety of other editors you might be interested in using, but VS Code being the most popular, it's a good resource because you'll be able to find other people who know a lot about it as well, and you'll also be able to find educational material to help you learn more. As I've been making these videos on YouTube talking about VS Code and all the things that people don't know, I've been going into a lot of the little tidbits of things where you can get a little bit of extra out of it if you understand all the little pieces. But I thought the best way to complement those videos was to create a crash course video. So that's this video. Hopefully at the end of this video, you will know how to use VS Code pretty effectively. You'll know all the different things that you can do in it and where everything is. I obviously won't be going into detail on every single piece. That's why this is the crash course. If you want to learn more, there are additional videos that you can watch from me, as well as others here on the internet. Let's go ahead and get started and take a look at VS Code. The first thing we'll want to do to get started is going to code.visualstudio.com/download to download the latest version of VS Code for your platform. You'll find Windows, Linux, and Mac OS versions here. Remember I said this is a cross-platform solution, so no matter which OS you're on, there is a tool for you. For the most part, I'd recommend going with one of the standard installs rather than choosing any of the simple options. So any of these top ones here. Now, I've obviously chosen to download the Visual Studio Code for Windows because I'm on Windows here, but you can download the one that matches your operating system. Once you've downloaded it, you're going to want to go ahead and run the installer. With this installer, you get a standard license agreement. You can accept it, read through it if you like. And then on this screen, I want to make one thing clear. I highly recommend that you check all of these boxes during the install. This might differ a little bit if you're on Linux or Mac, but there should be some options similar to these. I recommend that you check all of these because these are going to add integrations into your operating system that will make editing your code easier in the future. This first one is just a desktop icon. That one's up to you. But these ones add Open with Code action to Explorer for the File Context menu, add it for directories, register it as an editor for basic file types that it supports, and adding it to your path. All of these are going to make development much easier. Go ahead and click Next, and then Install. The first time you open Visual Studio Code, it's going to look a little bit like this. I'll explain how yours is different in a moment. First off, it's going to open you on the Get Started screen. That's this big welcome page right here. If you don't want this to come up again, you can uncheck the box. But most people keep this one going because it's got a couple of convenient things. That includes links to open a new folder, just in case it opened a project that you want to change away from. It also has your recent projects, so you might open those as well. One of the other things that's going to happen normally, in our case this didn't happen, but that's because I chose not to. Normally when you use Visual Studio Code, it's going to open up the project you were running previously. So if you were working on something yesterday, you open up Visual Studio Code today, it's going to have your project open that you were working on, so you don't have to go find it again. If you want to change projects, you just open up folders. For those of you that are used to larger IDEs, you might be used to the idea of having some kind of project file. If that's the case, don't worry about that with VS Code. It works with folders and files. It doesn't really have a project file structure like you might be used to with some other full IDEs. Now let's take a look around the UI. We have a couple of things here. First, I want to start off by talking about the left-hand sidebar, as that is the main navigation and the main point where a lot of stuff is going to happen in VS Code. So along the side, you've got Explorer, which allows you to see the files in your current project, which I'll open one up in a minute so we can see it. It has a search section, and this lets you both search the individual file that you're on, but it also searches the entire folder you have open. And that's why this is a little bit more powerful than, say, a standard Control-F search would be in Windows. If you put your cursor over it, you'll notice it is Control-Shift-F. So if anybody's used to Visual Studio, that is the same keyboard shortcut to do that there. The next icon down is this branching structure. So this is for your source control. By default, this is connected to Git, and so you can use this to clone, commit, push, and a lot of other things with remote Git repositories. Next down in the list is this, the Run and Debug tool. So here's where you can essentially do some of your debugging work. And for any time you are working with a code editor, it's important to be able to run and debug the code, and this is where you're going to do that. The next one down that shows these blocks coming together is the extension screen. And this one is critical to Visual Studio Code. And the reason why is Visual Studio Code is an editor that can be customized to whatever type of development you're doing. So if you're a web developer, you might have a lot of extensions for web development and HTML. If you work in C#, you might have some C# extensions installed. If you work in Java, you'd have Java extensions installed. So rather than having a different editor for each type of development you might do, Visual Studio Code allows you to include the ones that you want to have. Down here is a little person icon, and that is for the accounts. You can log into an account when you're in Visual Studio Code, and this will allow you to do things like synchronize your settings and other stuff like that. There are a few advantages to being logged in. The last one is one of the most important items for a lot of the types of stuff that you would do in Visual Studio Code that not everyone does. So in my videos about things people didn't know about VS Code, I open this a lot to show people things. This has a lot of the settings and other adjustments and tweaks that you might want to make when you're in VS Code. One thing I want to note, as we moved around, some of you may have noticed that each one of these menus, these two did not, but each one of these has a keyboard shortcut that it lists when your cursor is over it. And most of the items in this menu have keyboard shortcuts listed as well. You'll find similar things as you navigate around in the menus. Keyboard shortcuts are a big thing in Visual Studio Code. As a result, I want to take a look at a couple of things out of the Manage menu to start with. In Visual Studio Code, if you want to have a reasonable amount of efficiency in your work, you'll want to memorize more than a few keyboard shortcuts. You certainly don't need to know them all. There are way too many for anyone to actually keep track of. In order to find keyboard shortcuts, you can pull up this menu the way I did by using the Manage menu, or you can just remember KS for keyboard shortcuts. If you press Ctrl KS, it opens up the keyboard shortcuts and allows you to see all of the shortcuts in your system. Now, mine are obviously showing the Windows shortcuts, but if you are on a different system, you'll see different shortcuts. And that means that you can use this to search for any that I mentioned that don't match yours. For example, if you wanted to know how to open up the command palette, you can find a few keyboard shortcuts for opening up the commands. So if you want to open up Show All Commands, you can press F1, or you can press Ctrl-Shift-P. You may have noticed that that one, if you close this, is listed right down here. Show All Commands, Ctrl-Shift-P. Additionally, notice that I got rid of the Welcome window, and it's showing me Open File, Open Folder, and Open Recent. So these are all features that it wants to tell me about in my current context. So this is context aware. Notice that it says Open Folder. If I already had a folder open, it might be suggesting a different keyboard shortcut. For example, opening up the terminal or running and debugging the code. These are context-aware helpers that appear right here. Now that we know where to find our keyboard shortcuts, let's go ahead and open up a folder and take a look at some files. So you'll remember I talked about the Explorer tab. If we open a folder, it usually opens the Getting Started again, and that's okay. Again, you can always uncheck this box if you don't want Getting Started to show up. The Explorer has customizable menus. Once you've got it open, you can choose what you want to see. For example, I keep NPM scripts here. Not everyone does. Some people don't have timeline, and some people don't have outline. I want to focus on these two, as they're the main ones that you're going to be working with. The one labeled as HTML on my side is actually just the folder we're in. I'm in a folder called HTML, and this is the content that is inside of it. The open editors is empty. I don't have any editors open. If I were to click on a file, that will open it in preview mode. Now I want to cite that. You'll notice it now appears in the open editors, but if I click somewhere else, you'll notice there's no tab for index anymore, and I'm in fixed. Clicking around does not actually open the file. It opens it in preview. So you'll notice the italics in the title. If I double click, it opens it for real, and you'll notice no italics, no italics. When I click somewhere else, you'll now see that there are two windows open, depending on which one I've opened. If I open one of the other ones, it will be in normal font as well. If I want to disable previews, I can click on that, and when I click on a file, it will just open it. I usually like having previews, but not everybody does. I like keeping the number of windows open to a minimum. Once you've got a lot of windows open, if you want to close them, you have a couple of ways. If you right-click on one of the tabs, you can close that tab, close the others, close all the ones to the right. You can close only the ones that have been saved, or you can close all. I'm going to close all. You may have noticed there were a bunch of other features there as well. Those are available whenever you've got files open. If you want to create new files, keep in mind where your context is. If I have the images folder opened, and I press new file, it's going to create here. But if I wanted to create one out here, I can just click on a sibling of the file I want to create. So if I have my cursor on the package.json file and click new file, you'll notice it's here as a sibling of package.json. Alternately, I could create a new folder, and again, it's going to be in the root. But if I have my cursor on images, it's going to create it inside of that folder. This acts a lot like the File Explorer. I can drag and drop files around, and I've got other contexts as well. As we look at this Explorer view, you'll notice that I've got a set of icons here for my files, and you can kind of tell them apart. You can see some HTML files, they've got brackets, you can see some curly braces for the JSON, a hashtag for the styles, and some images for my PNGs and JPEGs. If you want to change up how those look, this is where we start getting into file icons. We can come down here and we can say File Icons. And you'll notice that right now I have SETI selected. If I use my cursor, I can preview the other installed ones. You'll notice that by default, there are not many icon sets to choose from. But this is where extensions come in. If we go to Install Additional File Icon Themes and press Enter, it will search for file icon themes. There are a couple that I like. I'm a big fan of the VS Code icons theme. I also like the material icon theme. They're both good themes, and they're very popular. You'll notice lots of downloads. I recommend you grab one of these pretty early on in your career using Visual Studio Code, just because it makes things a little bit easier to read. If we scroll down and have a look at some of these, you'll see that there is a lot of variation in these icons to help you tell them apart. Now this might seem a little overwhelming, but remember, in your file, you're not going to have this many different icons altogether. So this will help you tell the difference between a few sets of files. In any given project, you won't have this level of variety. Let's install it and take a look. Once it's installed, I can now select which file icon theme I want. I'm going to stay with the default for now so we can watch it change. So this is the regular set. If I come down here and click Manage, I can go to File Icon Theme, and I can now choose the Material Icon Theme. And now it has changed. And you'll see it looks a little bit different. So now I've got the CSS3 style icon, the HTML5 style icon, I've got little JS hexagons, and some images. Now, this didn't do a whole lot with the set of code I have here, but if I had some other config files, maybe an XML file, and a few others, it gets a lot easier to read when you have a more interesting file icon set. In Search, I'm going to show you how this one works. So if I were to search for an article in here, you'll see that it brings up all the different files. And before I click on one of these, remember, it's going to open up previews of them for me. So when I click, it's going to bring up previews of these files so I can see in context what is going on. Keep in mind also, I can do find and replace with these. This also supports regular expressions, matching whole word, and it does case-sensitive matching. So there's a little bit of power in here. It's not really powerful, but if you know regular expressions, it can help you out. Let's have a look at source control. When you have this open, you'll notice that it has a couple of things. It'll let me push up commits if I want. I can do some committing if I make changes. When I go back into source control, you'll see that I now have this modification that I could commit, but I'm going to reject. So I will discard that change, and it allows you to do just a little bit of Git work without having to leave the editor. Now, I personally like working in the command line for all my Git, but you can get away with this. The next window is the Run and Debug window. It'll create a custom launch JSON file in your project with the details so that you can run and debug your project. I'm not going to show this here, as this is a better thing for other videos where we actually go into running and debugging projects, but just know that it is available here by default in Visual Studio Code. Now, inside of extensions, I showed you how to get a theme, but I also want to make sure that we cover a handful of basics that I think most people should install. So let's take a look at those now. One of the first things that I recommend that people install is some kind of code formatting tool. Now, I like Prettier, but there are other choices as well. So I'm going to show you this one. So Prettier is an extension that you'll notice 25 million downloads have happened of it. It works in a variety of different languages and can do a little bit of formatting that can help you out. All we have to do to get this running is install it. Once we do, we now have the extension, as it says, installed globally. So it is installed in VS Code and we can format our code using Prettier. Once you have Prettier installed, you can go to one of your files and you can use Format Document. And when you do that, what's going to happen is it's going to ask you which code formatter you want to use. Now, there is, in my case, an HTML language features that we use, or we can use the Prettier one. You'll notice that once I do that, it makes a couple of adjustments to the file to match the Prettier settings. Now, you can choose whichever ones you want, and you can customize your code formatter. Another extension that I recommend most people get is auto rename. And the reason why I like the auto rename tag is it helps you if you work with HTML and XML tags, which a lot of us have to do. If you use it, what it's going to do for you is change the name of the second tag as you change the first tag. So your opening tag, let's say it's your head, if you type in header, it doesn't change the lower one. Once you install the auto rename tag, if you go in here and you say, instead of article, you say section, you'll notice that both tags change at the same time. So if I change this from an unordered list to an ordered list, it changes as well. So the advantage here is that you don't have to remember to change the other tag. It makes things a lot easier. Some other extensions that you might want to look at if you're working with a specific language. For example, I work with C#, so I have the C# extension installed. If you worked with another language, say Python, you might search for Python and find that there is a Python extension that has a lot of downloads and can help you a lot with IntelliSense, linting, debugging, etc. So there are a lot of advantages to installing an extension for your language. Search for your language. I'm sure there's a popular extension that pretty much everybody uses. So we've customized our icons, and I showed you a little bit about that. I didn't show the fact that some folders have special naming. So you'll notice if I do a JS folder, it puts in the JS icon. If I do a CSS folder, it puts the CSS icon as well. So there are a lot of these types of things that if you just type in, you'll see that there are specialized folders in those icons. There's a lot of other customizations we can make to the appearance of our Visual Studio Code as well. For example, you might have noticed that color theme was an option, and this one is Ctrl-KT. When we go in here, I have a couple of extensions already installed but you'll be able to see some themes. If I just move my cursor up and down, you'll notice that the theme changes. Some of those are a little bright. Sorry about that. And you can choose from dark themes and light themes. But the big thing here is that you can also install extensions with more themes in case there's not one that you like. You can go in here, it will search for themes, and every one of these is an extension you can install, but you can get a preview for it before you install it. Just bring your cursor over each one of these and you can find one that you like. Maybe you like the community material theme, and it will go ahead, find the extension, and install it. And so now I have a slightly different theme. And you can choose whichever one you want, find one you like. In addition to just customizing the theme, we can also customize the settings. To do that, I usually use Control Dot, but you can come down here and find settings here. It's also in a couple of other places, but get used to the Manage menu because it has a lot of the things you're looking for. Once you open up settings, you'll notice there are a lot of settings in an editor. Well, let's not search for those this way. For example, maybe you want to adjust something about your tabs. So just search for tab. And you can come in here and you can decide, do I want to adjust the tab size? You could change it from 4 to something else. Maybe you want to adjust the prettier tab width. So you'll notice when I formatted my document using prettier, it restricted me to 2 spaces per tab. You can adjust all these settings. There are a couple of settings that I think are important to note. One of the ones that I want to mention is I use render white space. I didn't have it on yet because I didn't want you all to see it, but I tend to turn on all rendered white space. I like seeing where the white space is so I can see if there are issues, clean it up, and other things like that. Other people just format the document. But it's up to you what you want to do with that. I showed you how to adjust tabs. Some people like to have tabs instead of spaces or spaces instead of tabs. This tells you whether or not pressing the tab key should insert spaces. These are some of the commonly used settings. If you check these, you'll find a lot of the settings you can adjust. Down here, you'll also notice word wrap. Now, I don't like word wrap, but some people love it. If it's one of the ones you change, go ahead and do that. And I don't need to show you where all these settings are, because you can always search. Maybe you want to change the font family. You can change the font family that is used for the editor. The next thing that I'm going to show you, I'll show in HTML, but it's going to apply regardless of which language you use. And that is going to be Emmet Abbreviations. I'm going to show it to you in HTML because it has some really cool stuff, and most people end up using HTML and JavaScript because a lot of people do web development, even if your primary language is, say, C# or Java. You probably don't escape web development entirely. While the examples I'm showing you are going to apply to HTML, know that there are Emmet abbreviations for other languages as well. Now, I've said the term Emmet abbreviations a couple of times now, and some people are probably wondering, Brendan, what are Emmet abbreviations? Why, thank you for the question. I would love to answer that. Emmet abbreviations are something you can think of as a code snippet. When you start off a file, code snippets are a great way to not have to copy-paste from somewhere else and to be able to start from scratch using little pieces to help. If you ever create an HTML file, odds are pretty good that you copied it from an existing HTML file. Instead of doing that, start with an abbreviation. Just hit exclamation point and hit enter. When you do that, you'll get this basic template. This has a couple of fields I'm not going to worry about right now because this is not HTML course. We're talking about VS Code. So I'm going to skip setting these and just leave all this alone. Now, once we're down here, we can use more Emmet abbreviations because at this point you're like, okay, cool, I got to make HTML. Great. Inside my body, maybe I've got an article, and that is an Emmet abbreviation. And maybe inside my article, I have a paragraph. That's an Emmet abbreviation. And you might be going, oh, okay, I could write a P tag on my own. You're right, you could. But could you add a class? If I type in P followed by .note, that creates a class with the name note. If I want an ID, I can create one with an ID. I can do the same thing with both. I could say p.note and Brendan, and it creates one with the name note and the ID of Brendan. And those are kind of useful. But we can also do bigger structures than this. I could, for example, create a section, and inside of that section, I could name that section Socials, and inside of it, I could create a list, and that list could have the class links, and inside of that, I could include a list item, and that list item could have a class of item. And you'll notice it creates the structure. A section with ID of socials, an unordered list with the class of links, and a list item with a class of item. Now, I can do more than just those because I could also set up properties and other things like that. And I want to point out that these snippets, the structure of them, the style of them, is not specific to HTML. So this concept, this structure exists elsewhere, and it is available for me. So if you are using any language in VS Code, take a look, see if it has Emmet abbreviations, and if so, figure out what you need to do to get them working in your VS Code for whatever language it is you are using. They obviously have it for HTML, CSS, and a variety of other languages as well. Now, if I want to create these items, maybe I want to make 10 of them. I can create 10 list items inside of there, and awesome, I've got 10. Now, you might have noticed something else. You'll see that my cursor is blinking on this first line, but there's some kind of highlighting in all the other lines. What I can do is type in all of the different values that I want to do to fill into this list. And by typing all of these in, I can then complete the abbreviation. Once I'm done, you'll notice that I no longer have that highlighting, and in theory I've added items all the way down. Now, I want to point out that this is not specific to HTML. Yes, I'm showing you the example of Emmet abbreviations in HTML. However, this exists in other languages. Go take a look, see which ones are available in your language, and there's probably similar things that can help you with some of the basic structures you need to create in your language. This is a powerful way of using snippets. Now that we're in a file and we're able to start editing, I want to show you a couple of things. I've covered a lot of these in my VS Code videos that you may have checked out in the playlist, which again, I'll link down in the description so you can find it. It's got neat little tricks in VS Code that you should be using. But one of the big ones, this exists in a lot of editors, but I want to show it to you anyway. Click the numbers. Always, no matter what editor you're in, make sure that you've got line numbers turned on in the settings, because you can usually click on them. So when I click on one, notice that it selects the whole line. So there's none of that, nope, you don't have to do that. Just click on the number. If you want to select multiple lines, click the number, drag it down to the next one. And that is going to highlight big sections. Now, why is that important? Well, let me show you. If I try to grab this line, and I cut it, and I come down here and I paste it, you'll notice it messed up the formatting. And the reason is, it didn't actually grab the new line at the end of the line. So what I needed to do was get that. If I click the number, you'll notice this little bit of extra space at the end. That's the new line. If I cut this and come down here, you'll notice it transfers just fine. That's because I'm controlling the right thing. Additionally, in VS Code, if you have your cursor on a line and you aren't selecting anything, it has your selection to be that entire line. So if I were to hold Control and hit X, it will cut that line, as if I had it highlighted. Additionally, it has it available for copying and pasting. So if I copy and paste, I have it as well. Again, Control Z, Control V, just like normal. If I want to move this line, I can hold the Alt key and hit the down arrow or the up arrow, and it moves the line between the others. If I want to duplicate the line, I can hold Alt and Shift and move down, and it will make copies of the line. There are also other features that are really useful. For example, I can hold the Alt and the Shift key and click down here, and you'll notice that I now have a multi-select. So I could say link to those, and you'll notice it modified all the lines. And you go, wow, that's really cool. And it is, but there's actually other neat things we can do. So I did a drag, but you don't have to. You can click individually wherever you want, and it will modify in all of those places at once. Now, obviously, that wasn't something I would want to do. However, I might want to do this. So if I grab all of these and I hit the end key, it will actually put my cursor at the end of the line. You'll notice that they're no longer lined up. If I hit to the left a little bit, I can modify here. And you'll notice now, because they all had the same end tag, I can actually modify at the ends of this line. Check this out. I can actually modify them all at the same point after the fact, and if I were to click them, I could individually click here, click here, click here, click here, click here, but it was a lot faster to just go, oh yeah, I'm just going to grab this whole section, hit the end key, hit over a few, and I'm done. And I've got them all selected. And this would have worked even if I wanted all 10. And then, boom, I've got the ends of the line. I can come back to before the tag and start editing. So I get a lot of power out of all of those things. The last big thing that I want to impress upon you about VS Code is that everything is about searching. When I open up the search window, I can open up this search files window by holding Control and hitting E. You probably saw that when we were back here. Well, it said Control P for go to file. I used Control E. They both work. There are a lot of identical keyboard shortcuts. Remember that keyboard shortcut for keyboard shortcuts? Yeah, KS. Go look it up and you'll see what yours are. Anyway, I want to show you this window. You'll notice that it shows some recently opened files that we have in the project, but I could also search for them. I could search for the lock file. I could search for package. I could search for soup, and it will find my div soup. If I wanted to find DISP, you'll see that it's searching just anywhere in there to try to find something that matches, and it's going to choose the best ones. Now, some other things that I can do here, you'll notice that it says I can go to line numbers by using this. Now, I'm not in an editor, but if I were, I could just type the line number, hit enter, and go there. If I want to search for a symbol, again, if I'm in a file, it will show me the symbols. So now that I'm in a file, you'll see that it shows me the symbols in this file. So in an HTML file, that's the various different tag structures. If I'm inside of a C# file, that might be the different methods inside of it, or the class, or something like that. Either way, I'm going to see all of that data. However, if I were to hit the number sign instead, that can search for them across my whole project. Now, this doesn't work great for HTML files, but what you can do is use the number sign to search across all of your files for symbols. If I were in a C# project, as soon as I hit this, you would suddenly start seeing options for all the symbols across all my files. The last thing I want to show you is in this menu, I can use the greater than sign. And when I do that, this actually has me searching for commands. So you might remember that in the beginning, I showed you how to run format document. You'll notice here it's recently used because we just used it. If I hold Control-Shift-P, it brings this menu up. And you said, yeah, that's the menu where I can run various commands inside of VS Code. And you can. There are a whole bunch in here. So if you wanted to change your icon, theme, it's right in here. You'll see File Icon Theme in Preferences is right there. But I could also have searched for the color theme, which we used as well. That was how we changed the theme. Keep in mind that this was actually the same menu where we searched for files. So there are a lot of different variations that you can make to how you're searching, and you've got this available to you. Now again, I'm not going to go through it in today's video, but I also want to show you that there's an integrated terminal inside of VS Code. Just hold Control and hit the back tick, which is the key just above the tab on a US keyboard at least. It looks kind of like a single quote or an apostrophe that's angled the other way. It told me about it right here. Toggle the terminal, Control backtick. So I can bring it up or close it using that. And there's a whole bunch that we can dive into with the terminal, but we're not going to do that today. So mine opened as a PowerShell, but you can open an additional one in Git Bash, Command, or whatever's available on your computer. So obviously if you're not on Windows, you're going to have different terminals. I could open up a standard Windows command prompt, for example, and I can use that as well. And it keeps them both open. You can dive into a whole bunch more stuff that you can do with these, but it's a great way of running and testing your code. Hey everyone, thanks for watching this episode on DevChatter. I'm hoping you learned something about VS Code today, and you're able to use that in your next project. If you missed it at the beginning, my name's Brendan, and I'm the host of the DevChatter livestream, as well as our host here on YouTube. We're a community of welcoming individuals who are all interested in software development and other related tech. If you want to join us and be involved in the conversation, you can find links to our Discord down below, and you can also catch us on our live stream. Again, link in the description. If you want to see more videos from us, hit the subscribe button, and you'll be notified when we've got new episodes for you to watch. Take care, and happy coding, everyone. We'll see you next time.